I'm your host, Sara, and today we're talking all about transfer addictions. I thought that when I quit drinking that my biggest fight was over, but I soon started to realize that first I found myself obsessing over my food, what was I going to eat, and counting calories and macros. Then that shifted to not giving an F about what I ate and having all of the sugar in the world. And during all of that time, I had also transferred to weed or THC products, whatever you want to call them. Turns out that my addiction was just showing up in new forms. Now, it's interesting to me because it kind of took me a long time to say I'm a person with an addictive personality, but it's also something that I said when I was a drinker. I would say, oh no, I can't do things like cocaine. I have a very addictive personality. I know I'm someone who would just get addicted right away. Like, I knew that about myself, but it was really hard for me to see the addiction patterns in alcohol. And then it was really hard for me to see the addiction patterns in other things as they were transfer addictions for me. I don't want this episode to be something that scares you or turns you off from quitting drinking because I really think that quitting drinking was the best thing that I've quit so far. That and probably smoking cigarettes because cigarettes are so terrible for your health. That one was really hard to break. I actually broke that one before I quit drinking, but then 100% broke it when I quit drinking because I was a person who would smoke a cigarette from time to time when I was drinking. But quitting drinking definitely changed my life the most, but it really took me a while to get out of that addictive mindset. And I don't even want to say that I'm out of that addictive mindset. Like somebody said on a reel the other day, it was one where I was dancing around on a Saturday morning being like, this is what Saturday mornings are like now. Now I get to enjoy my coffee instead of using it as like a survival tool. And the person was like, well, you're obviously still an addict if you're consuming caffeine. And I just wrote, yeah, I know I'm still an addict, but caffeine is definitely the least of my worries at this point in my life. So if caffeine is going to be my addiction now, I guess I'll take it. I have actually weaned down my caffeine consumption so much and actually plan to do an episode on that because I did a 30-day detox from caffeine and then started moderating it. And it seems to be the only substance that I can moderate successfully. We'll see how that goes in the future. I definitely have to watch myself with it, but I'm digressing here. I just want you to know that sometimes there is a part of our brain that just makes us be an addictive personality. There are some people that it comes more easily to than others when it comes to becoming addicted to something. Now, I always say, why can't I just become addicted to like running? And even when I talk about like in the beginning, I was very addicted to tracking my food. That one feels so like weak to me. Like, really? That was your transfer addiction? But when I really look at it, my first transfer addiction was obviously weed, but I am a person who likes to feel like they are very in control. So having that food tracking piece still made me feel very in control of my journey in some way. So when did I realize I had a transfer addiction? I think it took me a while. I am a very slow learner when it comes to realizing I have a problem. Now, I realized that my drinking wasn't quote unquote normal, right? I knew that about myself. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to admit that I really needed to quit because it was a problem. I definitely didn't want to do something like AA because I felt like that was shining a light on the fact that I did not have control over this anymore. But as I continued my journey, I could see, hey, I'm not a person who can manage alcohol. I will be quitting drinking forever. My life is so much better without alcohol. It took me a little while. Then the same thing happened with weed. I started smoking weed right away after I quit drinking. It was definitely my way that I got the buzz still, right? It wasn't the same buzz and it didn't give me a hangover, so I felt like it was okay. It also felt natural to me, and I really do think it is the lesser of two evils, okay? I don't want you to hear that the way to quit drinking is to start smoking weed. I don't want you to hear that. I definitely love being 100% sober, and it was very, very hard to get to be 100% sober because I chose this as my transfer addiction. I highly recommend your transfer addiction be something like eating too much chocolate. But we're going to dive into what transfer addiction or cross addiction really is and how you can see if it's happening in you and some ways to manage it. Don't worry, I'm going to help you out in this episode. But I, again, am a slow learner, and it took me a while to see that my weed use was holding me back in some areas. It was becoming a problem. It was becoming yet another addiction for me. And I could see that it was all of the same things that alcohol did for me. Like, I was constantly thinking about it. I was thinking to myself, oh, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to stay home so I can just smoke weed and clean my house. Like, what an exciting stoner I was. I just wanted to stay home and clean my house. But I could see this is becoming my new addiction. This is becoming my new obsession. So I knew I needed to change it. And I used all of the tools that I used when I quit drinking. And slowly but surely, I got there. I have a whole nother episode on this, and I will try to link it in the show notes, but I know that it's not very far down below this, where I talk all about my quits and fails when it came to quitting smoking weed and how I finally got to a year sober from weed as well. Now, other transfer addictions that people may see are things like doom scrolling or eating or maybe even hanging out with toxic people. There are all different ways you might see this, and you might already be listening to this and going, this is me. Oh no. So let's dive into what it actually is. So transfer addiction is often called cross addiction. So I want you to know that you're going to hear it in different ways. Maybe it's going to be transfer addiction, cross addiction, or addiction substitution. But cross addiction is defined by Psychology Today as a term used to describe when one compulsive behavior is exchanged for another compulsive behavior. This can be in the form of substance to substance, like alcohol to cannabis, or substance to behavior, like alcohol to exercise or work. And some studies suggest that fat and sugar can actually activate the same pleasure centers in the brain that drugs and alcohol can activate. And that's why a lot of times the transfer addiction is sugar or high-fat foods. I know for me, when I get a bag of Cheetos, it feels like I'm getting alcohol. It feels like, ooh, I'm being so naughty. I am going to go get my Cheetos and I'm going to sit in my car and I'm going to sneak them. I would say that Cheetos are probably my transfer addiction these days. I really don't consume them very often, and they definitely aren't the thing I'm thinking about all the time. I have had to do the same work with them that I've done with alcohol and weed. So even if you're finding yourself with a certain food feeling very compulsive about it, it's just something to recognize and realize that it's giving your brain pleasure centers the same thing that alcohol was doing. So it's very normal. That's the other thing. I don't want you to feel bad. I don't want you to feel guilty. This is all very normal. And I also want you to know that transfer addiction is often unconscious. It creeps in to fill an emotional, neural, or psychological void. Just like alcohol addiction is not your fault, neither is the transfer addiction, okay? It's just the way the brain works. Alcohol is an addictive substance. People become addicted to it. That starts opening up that addictive piece of our brain, and then we want to put that addictive piece of our brain to work on something else when we give up alcohol. Now, I have shared my story about my different transfer addictions, and at this point in my life, I know that Cheetos is still there. It's still kind of this thing that talks to me, but not as often. And otherwise, at this moment, I am feeling good. But what I want you to know is I'm always watching for it. I do not feel like I am quote unquote safe at this point. And I also know that my sobriety takes work. So knowing things about transfer addiction or cross addiction helps me be aware. And that's what I want you to know too. If you're farther along in your journey, knowing these things gives you more power in your journey. And I hope now that I have more knowledge, I can kind of recognize when these things are becoming a slippery slope for me. And that's what I'm hoping for you today. So let's dive into the science of why this happens so you can have a better understanding of it in case it is something that's happening in your life. We're going to dive into 4 different areas, and the first one happens to be my favorite to talk about. It is the dopamine processing part of our brain and what addiction actually does to it. Addictive substances produce large surges of dopamine in the brain's reward circuitry. These surges are much higher than natural rewards would be. And over time, with repeated exposure, the brain adapts. It downregulates dopamine receptors and it reduces its responsiveness, making natural rewards feel less satisfying. Imaging studies in humans have shown that long-term users have reduced dopamine release and fewer receptor binding sites. Because of this, the brain becomes hypodopaminergic, and that means it has a lower baseline reward sensitivity. This means that it requires stronger stimuli to feel alive, for your brain to feel excited about things. And this is why when you quit drinking, oftentimes you will feel flat. This is why when I ditched caffeine, I felt very flat. At the time that I decided to ditch caffeine, I was actually about 1 month into my weed-free journey. I had been alcohol-free for over 5 years. I was feeling really strong on that. I was ditching weed and I felt really strong. I felt like I'm doing it this time. I can feel this time is different. And then I decided I should probably ditch caffeine too. Why not? No, in all seriousness, I was experiencing a lot of anxiety and I thought, caffeine might be the last thing, and maybe it's the thing that I can take away and I'll feel so much better. But when I did that, I was just taking away all of my brain's ways that it was getting dopamine, and my life felt very flat. It felt very boring. For like all of the month of November, I just kept thinking, is this worth it? I was on Reddit forums reading about other people's experiences with ditching caffeine, but now that I look at it, I should have also been considering the idea that I was ditching weed as well, and I had gone back to weed after a long time off of it. So it's like I had reopened all these neural pathways. So it was probably making it even harder for all these dopamine receptors. This is what I want you to remember. If you are all of a sudden finding yourself 100% sober and it feels flat and it feels boring, it is because your brain needs to learn how to create its own dopamine again. It takes time. So I got very diligent on doing a few things. I made sure I was doing meditation, so I was finding a way to have dopamine naturally. I continued to work out and move my body. I made sure I was getting outside, and I made sure I was listening to music. All of these things are big dopamine boosters for me, and they make me feel good. I made sure to do a lot of the feel-good things, even when it felt like those things were work, and over time, all those things have started to feel fun again. And my life has started to feel fun again. It took a little while. It really, really did. But I could also look back at my life with all of those substances and go, it wasn't as cool as I thought it was. I was obsessed with things. I was thinking about them all the time. I didn't want that anymore. But I just want you to know that if you recently quit drinking and you're feeling flat, that's why. And it's going to come back and you're going to do dopamine producing activities and you are going to start feeling good again. The next area that I want to talk about is incentive sensitization and wanting versus liking. The incentive theory posts that addiction shifts the brain to want more or crave it even when you don't like it more. This is why people say, I still was drinking even though I didn't like it anymore. I would drink, but I wasn't even enjoying it. That's how I felt with weed. I was smoking and I didn't even enjoy it. It was really just making me feel really paranoid. It was really just making me fall asleep on my couch early at night. Like it was not giving me what I was hoping it was, but my brain just kept wanting it. Cues associated with the substance become hypersalient. This is all normal, and it really is part of the incentive sensitization theory. And oh my gosh, I'm having the hardest time saying sensitization today, so I hope that it's coming out okay. But as you build association networks, environmental cues, and emotional states, or even time of day, these can all trigger intense cravings, even after extended abstinence. And that's why sometimes these intense cravings will pop up out of nowhere because we have really built these networks in our brain, these association networks. And our brain just thinks, I want this thing. even if it doesn't like it anymore. And that's why your brain may really work to find anything to fill that void. It's going to go, okay, well, I can't have alcohol, then let's have a candy bar. Let's have a bag of Cheetos. It's going to look for the thing that can give it its dopamine the fastest. It's not going to say, let's go for a walk. Hey, let's go soak up the sun and then do a meditation. You have to start practicing those things regularly and creating the new neural pathways to your brain that make your brain go, oh my gosh, I want to meditate. I'm so excited to meditate. This actually happens for me now. I get excited to meditate. I'm like, yes, it's one of my favorite parts of the day. And it can really happen for you. So just know we can retrain our brain of what it wants. The next thing I want to talk about is reward substitution and addiction substitution evidence. A systemic review of 96 studies on addiction substitution found that while only 17.65% of studies showed strong support for substitution, many reported concurrent addiction or patterns shifting in recovery. One recent study by Biomed Central on people in early recovery explored cannabis substitution after resolving opioid or stimulant addiction. The motives included coping, pain relief, and emotional regulation. Now, all of the articles that I used to research this will be linked in the show notes of this episode, so if you're curious, go check that out. The notion in these studies, though, is that when the primary addiction is removed, because the brain is starved for reward, it may latch onto another behavior or substance that stimulates the dopamine. And again, like I mentioned before, your brain wants it quick because that's what it was getting with alcohol. So it's going, where can I get it the fastest? Let's get that buzz going. I want to feel my dopamine receptors get the surge right now. Now, the underlying emotional drivers to having this transfer or cross addiction or addiction substitution often are things like stress, boredom, trauma, and shame. And these often remain unaddressed, which leave a vacuum for new addictions to fill. So these are things that I had to start exploring within myself and really get honest about. This meant learning how to talk about my feelings in a more productive way with my husband. It also meant learning how to parent in a different way that makes me feel more calm and not elevated. And it also just meant taking time to explore my emotions. How do they feel in my body? How do I react? Am I happy with the way I react? Can I change it the next time? And it also meant that I had to figure out a way to fill that void in a healthy way. So to fill that void with working out, or to fill that void with being outside, meditation, singing, all the things that I know fill me up with dopamine in a positive way. Now, the last area that I want to talk to you about is neuroplasticity and long-term recovery. Fortunately, the brain has plasticity. This means that over months to years of abstinence, structural and functional recovery can occur in rewards and executive circuit. I know you might have just heard over months and over years and been like, oh my God, it's going to take that long. But what I want you to hear is that your brain can return to normal. Your brain can actually get its dopamine levels back to where it's not just always searching for those quick hits. I do want you to know that recovery takes time and it takes intention. And every time you go back to the quick hits, it takes it even longer. So even though it can feel so easy to go, I'm just going to do the thing that makes it get to me faster. I'm just going to go back for a drink. Then you're setting yourself back. You reopen those neural pathways, and then the plasticity has to start its work all over again. The prefrontal cortex function, which is where we have executive control and inhibition, is often impaired from our addictions, and it is slower to rebound. So give it time. Even years into sobriety, cues or vulnerabilities can still wake up these addiction circuits. That's why we can be floating through our life, feeling great on our alcohol-free journey, and then whoop, all of a sudden our brain goes, want to have a drink? And we have to go, no, I don't want to drink. What are you talking about? But it's also why it's so important to consistently do the work. Things that I talk about all the time and I've mentioned in this episode, like, are you getting quiet time to yourself, like meditation or breath work? Are you journaling if that's something that works for you? Are you writing down gratitudes? Are you moving your body in a healthy way that boosts dopamine production? And I know that feels very confusing and people are always going, well, what is the work? It's all the things that I just listed. So don't feel like you need to go out and reinvent the wheel. It can simply be, I'm going to start meditating with a meditation app, and I'm going to start going on walks outside and listening to music to wake up my dopamine receptors. So I know that was a lot of information, but how do you recognize this in yourself? I want you to ask, first just think, when you stop drinking, do you suddenly become more rigid about food or obsess over sugar or turn to weed more often? I think that a lot of times what can happen is we quit doing one thing and we think, I'm going to do all these other things now. I'm going to get better at all these other things. And that can even be that transfer addiction happening. So just be aware. Also ask yourself, do you feel uneasy or unsettled if you can't engage in the new habit? So for me, I had to start seeing like, ooh, when I'm not going to smoke weed for a night, it makes me feel uneasy. I think about it all the time. I don't think about it all the time anymore, but in those first few weeks, I did, and that was a hard part to break. And I also want you to ask yourself this, if you have habits that you're wondering, is this a transfer addiction? Think, do these new habits feel less like pleasure and more like a compulsion? And lastly, do you experience guilt, shame, or a sense of, I'm still chasing something? That was the big one right there with weed for me. I definitely felt guilt and shame over it. I definitely felt like my husband was judging me. I definitely felt guilty and that I wasn't showing up as my best self. And I definitely felt like I was still chasing something. So if you've asked yourself those questions and you're like, oh man, yep, I've got a transfer addiction going on, or cross addiction, or addiction substitution, how are you going to heal the void? Because this is big work, right? You're going, well, how do I even do it? I'm going to give you 7 super fast tools and practices to put into place. Number 1 is awareness and naming. Say out loud, this is becoming my new numbing behavior. This was big for me. I started making TikToks about it. I started making reels about it. Now, obviously, you're probably not going to do that because you probably don't have a page about quitting drinking. And now you're like, whoa, I have this other addiction. I'm going to talk about it. But I started telling people like, hey, I've got to work on this. I've got to change it. I also talked to my husband about it. And I also talked to people that I knew smoked weed and quit. Having the awareness that this was a new numbing behavior for me was huge. Second, I had to start slowing the dopamine rush. I had to move towards low-grade, sustainable sources like walking, being outside, journaling, and meditating. All of those things aren't quick hits, but all of those things over time helped me return to a baseline. Number 3, I had to start feeling over fixing. I had to learn to sit with discomfort instead of leaping into relief. And number 4, and I'm still working on this one, boundaries and limits. If sugar is your thing, I want you to think of how you can cut back on sugar. How can you do it slowly if you need to do it that way? Or is it something where you can be abstinent from it for 30 days? If it's cannabis, how can you restrict your cannabis time? For me, I had to let my pen finally run out of battery, and then it would be harder. It made me have think time if I thought I wanted to smoke. It made me have to charge my pen, and by the time I would, I'd be like, oh. And if I really, really wanted it, I could charge my pen. And the first thing I had was 100% CBD oil. So it's like I'd get the hit, but I wouldn't get the buzz. And a lot of times by then I'd go, this is stupid. Why am I doing this? Number 5, look into therapy or coaching. You can explore underlying drivers with a therapist or with a coach and start identifying trauma, grief, and identity. Now, I am not a therapist, but I do know that even doing something like the Daymakers community can help you explore these underlying drivers, just because a lot of times you can talk to other people within the community and say, oh my gosh, you're experiencing that. I'm experiencing that too. And even that can help. And that leads perfectly into number 6, which is community and accountability. Having a group where you are actually talking about alcohol addiction and getting on top of it and changing the hold it has on you is so powerful. And then you can actually start exploring with other people in that group about other addictive patterns. In every sober circle that I chat in, I hear people talk about, well, now I've started smoking weed, or now I've started doom scrolling. Now I'm just eating everything in sight. It's something we all talk about, and just having that piece where you can talk about it with other people lets you know that you're not alone. And then you can hear stories from people who have actually changed that next behavior. And then you can tell yourself, all right, well, they did it. I can do it too. And you can start learning from how they did it. Number 7, I want you to get creative and start thinking about how how you can do soul work. Now, this might be like, what? What the heck is soul work? But it's pretty simple. Anything that is creative, anything where you are creating something and it is coming out of you is soul work. That's why I have mentioned singing, music. That's soul work for me. So maybe for you, it's making art. Maybe it's pottery. Maybe it's drawing. Maybe it's writing. What is the thing that lights you up? I want you to figure that out, and I want you to keep doing that. These are things you do because of the meaning, because of the purpose, the feeling of purpose that they give you. And it's not always about reward, although singing is a reward to me. It makes me feel good. So find out what that thing is for you and do more of it. I really hope this information has helped. And if you're catching yourself in a cross addiction or transfer addiction, before you do it the next time, I want you to pause and ask yourself, what do I actually need right now? When you can start answering that question and then actually give yourself that thing that you really need, it's going to make it so much easier to start stripping away these addictions. I also want you to know if you're finding yourself stuck in a cross addiction, you are not failing. If you're struggling, you're evolving. After you listen to this episode, I just want to invite you to journal a little bit on this topic so you can start seeing these patterns in yourself. Maybe they're not there because you are already doing the work and you're not needing to fill the void because you're fixing the void. I really hope this episode was helpful. And if you haven't already, be sure to leave a review or rate this podcast. Like I say all the time, it is the easiest way to support the podcast and it's totally free. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be in your ear in the next episode.